Welcome to Teacher Sally YouTube channel. In today's video lesson, I will discuss about non-Mendelian pattern of inheritance. I'm here to help you identify characters whose inheritance does not conform with predicted outcomes based on Mendel's laws of inheritance and solve genetic problems related to incomplete dominance and codominance. Are you ready? So without further ado, let's get started. In your grade 8, you have learned that gametes and somatic cells divide to produce new cells. Yet, it is the gametes that are responsible in passing the genes from generation to generation through the process called meiosis. You have also learned that Mendel proposed different laws of inheritance that explain how the traits from your parents are being passed on to you and even to your siblings. However, there are some traits that we can say that violate these patterns of inheritance. In this new lesson, you will discover new patterns of inheritance that does not follow Mendel's and some of their real-life examples. Mendelian inheritance patterns involve genes that directly influence the outcome of an organism's traits and obey Mendel's laws. Most genes in eukaryotic species follow a Mendelian pattern of inheritance. However, there are many that do not. For the traits that Mendel have studied, one allele is completely dominant over the other. Thus, the phenotype of the resulting heterozygous offspring is identical to that of the homozygous dominant parent. But not all inheritance is based on the rules of complete dominance. Now, let's review those laws quickly. According to the law of segregation, a parent who has two alleles for a gene can only pass on one allele or the other to each offspring. Now, for the law of independent assortment, two or more traits are inherited separately from each other and they don't always occur together. And for the law of dominance, one dominant allele will take charge over a recessive allele and mask it. The only way recessive alleles can be seen is if an individual possesses two copies of the recessive allele. Now, these are the basic rules of Mendelian genetics, but as scientists began exploring more and more test crosses, they found the traits that did not match up nicely with what these laws predicted, and this is the non-Mendelian genetics, or the genes that don't obey Mendel's laws. Some traits exhibited a kind of blending where the offspring of organisms with two different traits did not have one or the other forms from the parents. They had something that was sort of in the middle. This implies that certain alleles are not dominant over the other ones. Rather, they share roles like harmonious friends. Some traits seem to be controlled by complex inheritance patterns. Non-Mendelian genetics are basically any inheritance patterns that don't follow one or more laws of Mendelian genetics. Now, let's take a look at some of the different types of non-Mendelian genetic inheritance patterns. Non-Mendelian inheritance is a general term that refers to any pattern of inheritance in which traits do not segregate in accordance with Mendel's laws. Non-Mendelian traits are not determined by dominant or recessive alleles, and they can involve more than one gene. Now, there are other types of inheritance that Mendel never considered, and these are the non-Mendelian genetics that includes incomplete inheritance, codominance, multiple alleles, polygenic traits, and sex link. At the end of this lesson, you are expected to, number 1, explain incomplete dominance and codominance pattern of inheritance, and number 2, solve problems involving incomplete dominance and codominance using Punnett square. With incomplete dominance, a cross between organisms with two different phenotypes produce offspring with a third phenotype that is a blending of the parental traits. It's like mixing pinks. Red and white will make pink. Red does not totally block the pink. Instead, there is incomplete dominance and we end up something in between. Incomplete dominance is when a dominant allele or form of a gene does not completely mask the effects of a recessive allele, and the organism's resulting physical appearance shows a blending of both alleles. It is called semi-dominance or partial dominance. One example is shown in roses. The allele for red color is dominant over the allele for white color. But heterozygous roses, which have both alleles, are pink. Note that this is different from codominance, which is when both alleles are expressed at the same time. Now let's have incomplete inheritance problem. Number 1. What is the result of the cross between a red flower and a white flower? What would be the genotypes and the phenotypes of the offspring? And what are the phenotypic and the genotypic ratios? Now we can still use the Punnett square to solve problems involving the incomplete dominance. The only difference is that instead of using a capital letter for the dominant trait and a lowercase letter for the recessive trait, the letters we use are both going to be capital because neither trait dominates the other. To understand the mechanism of incomplete dominance, the botanist used Punnett square. The Punnett square predicts the genotype of the breeding experiment. In this case, one plant producing red flowers and another plant producing white flowers are crossed. A genotype is an individual's collection of genes. RR and WW are possible genotypes of a 4 o'clock flower. When through breeding, pure red flowered 4 o'clock plant, and that is represented by two big R's, crosses with the true breeding pure white flowered 4 o'clock plant, and that is represented by WW. Their offspring are all pink flowered plants, represented by RW. They neither produce red nor white flowered plants because neither of the two is completely dominant. A heterozygous offspring with the intermediate trait of a pink color, showing that no allele gets dominated over the other. The two alleles are not expressed in a way to hide the effect of the other allele. Instead, the phenotype is in between the two and intermediate. Thus, the heterozygote is one that produces flowers with a pink color. The homozygous red flower has two dominant red alleles. These are represented by the letters RR. The homozygous white flower is represented by WW. Their offspring are all heterozygous, or RW, and they have pink flowers. This is the first filial generation, or F1. The genotypic and the phenotypic ratio is 4:0, or 100% heterozygous pink flowers. When the F1 generation cross-pollinates, their offspring will be RR, RW, and WW in a 1:2:1 ratio. Some of their offspring in the F2 generation will inherit two alleles. Some will inherit two W alleles and some will inherit both. Now for the F2 generation, the heterozygotes are crossed to see the respective phenotype. So as you can see in the F2 generation, we have here the phenotypic ratio of 1:2:1, or 25% red, 50% pink, and 25% white. Number 2. What is the probability of white flowers if pink flowers are bred with pink flowers? Now use Punnett square to show incomplete dominance. When the F1 generation cross-pollinates, their offspring will be RR, RW, and WW in a 1:2:1 ratio. Now, some of their offspring in the F2 generation will inherit 2 alleles, and some will inherit 2 WW alleles, and some will inherit both. Now, step 1, identify the genotype of the parents. So we have here heterozygous pink or RW crossed to heterozygous pink or RW. Step number 2, construct the Punnett square. We put the gametes of one parent on top and the gametes of the other parent alongside. Show the possible outcomes of the cross. So we have here big R, two big R's, RW, 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 and WW. Then step number 3, interpret the result. So we have here 1 homozygous red 4 o'clock flowered, 2 heterozygous pink 4 o'clock flowered, and 1 homozygous white 4 o'clock flowered. For the genotype, we have 1 RR, 2 RW, and 1 WW. And for the phenotype, we have 1 red, 2 pink, and 1 white. Then step number 4, write the genotypic and the phenotypic ratio of the offspring. So we have here 25% homozygous red, 50% heterozygous, and 25% homozygous white. So we have here the 1:2:1 ratio. And for the phenotype, we have 5% red, 50% pink, and 25% white. Now take note that the phenotype in the F2 generation result in the same ratio as proposed by Mendel. For example, the 1:2:1. The offspring phenotypes were 25% red flowers, 25% white flowers, and 50% pink flowers. This shows that incomplete dominance does not necessarily involve absolute blending, because the heterozygote contains both distinct traits or alleles. For example, the red and the white color, which after crossing the heterozygotes in the F2 generation, the red and the white color traits still appear. Moreover, in incomplete dominance, the offspring contain both alleles, but alleles expression gets intermediate between the two parent traits. Number 3, what is the probability of pink flowers if pink flowers are bred with red flowers? Step number 1, identify the genotype of the parents. So we have here RW cross to RR. Step number 2, construct the Punnett square. Put the gamete of one parent on top and the other gametes on the left side. Show the possible outcome by completing the Punnett square. So we have here homozygous red, heterozygous pink, and heterozygous pink. Step number 3, interpret the results. We have 2 homozygous red flowers and 2 heterozygous pink flowers. Step number 4, write the genotypic and the phenotypic ratio of the offspring. The genotypic ratio is 2:2, or 50% homozygous red and 50% heterozygous pink. Now the phenotypic ratio is the same with the genotypic ratio, which is 2:2. So there will be 50% chance of pink flowers in this cross. Now let's have some examples of incomplete dominance. First is 4 o'clock flowers. Neither red or white is dominant here. When a homozygous red flower mixed with homozygous white flower, the alleles blend in the hybrid to produce pink flowers. Now, the trick is to recognize when you are dealing with a question involving incomplete dominance. There are 2 steps to this. Number 1, notice that the offspring is showing a third phenotype. The parents each have 1 and the offspring are different from the parents. And number 2, notice also that the trait in the offspring is a blend or mixing of the parental traits. Number 2 is Andalusian chickens. Here, neither black or white are dominant. The offspring of a black feathered chicken and a white feathered chicken are blue or blue hen. Incomplete dominance here can occur because neither of the two alleles is fully dominant over the other, or because the dominant allele does not fully dominate the recessive allele, and this results in a phenotype that is different from both the dominant and the recessive allele, and appears to be a mixture of both. Another incomplete dominant trait is baby hair. In humans, hair texture is also considered to be incompletely dominant. Straight hair is homozygous and curly hair is homozygous, but neither is dominant over the other. So wavy hair is heterozygous and is intermediate between straight hair and curly hair. Most of the physical characteristics of humans, including hairs, eye color, height, skin color, sound, pitch, and hand sizes, show incomplete dominance. Children born with semi-curly or wavy hair is an example of incomplete dominance because the crossing of parents' alleles, both straight and curly hairs, to produce such offspring. Thus, incomplete dominance occurs to produce an intermediate trait between the two parent traits. Points to remember in incomplete dominance. First, only the phenotype of the heterozygote is blended or intermediate. Second, the alleles of the parents, which in this case are red and white flowered plants, are still distinct and separate from each other. And third, the genotypic ratio also becomes the phenotypic ratio. Check your understanding. Now that you have gained knowledge about the incomplete dominance, letter A, choose from the given words in the word bank to complete the sentence. And letter B, what is the result of a cross between a pink flower and a white flower? Show your cross on a Punnett square. What would be the genotypes and phenotypes of the offspring, and what are the phenotypic and the genotypic ratios? Write your answer on your notebook. Now you may pause the video to answer these. In the first type of non-Mendelian, you have learned that there are some genes in which the heterozygous offspring do not share the phenotype of either parent. Instead, they have intermediate phenotypes. This intermediate pattern of inheritance is called incomplete dominance. Now in this part, you are going to get in touch and eventually discover another intermediate pattern of inheritance that does not follow Mendel's principles, and this is codominance. Codominance is another form of intermediate inheritance that does not follow Mendel's laws. In this form of inheritance, the alleles of a gene pair in a heterozygote offspring are fully expressed or exhibited. As a result, the offspring's phenotype is the combination of the parents' phenotypes. Let me point out that the meaning of the prefix co is together. Co means together. Both traits are dominant and show up in the phenotype together. For example, cooperate means work together. Coexist means exist together. In the cross of black cow and white cow, the result is spotted cow. Let's have codominance problem. Number 1, what are all the possible phenotypes when two spotted cows are bred? When it comes to Punnett square and symbol, codominance is the same as the incomplete dominance. Now the first step that we will do is to identify the genotype parents. In this case, we have here PW cross to PW or heterozygous spotted cows cross to heterozygous spotted cows. Step number 2, construct a Punnett square. Label the columns with one parent's genotype and label the rows with other parent's genotype. Complete the Punnett square by showing all possible outcomes. Have each box inherit letters from its columns and row. Then step number 3, interpret the result. Write the genotype and phenotype. We have here the genotype of homozygous black, heterozygous spotted cow, and homozygous white. And the phenotype, we have black cow, spotted cow, and white cow. Then lastly, write the genotypic and the phenotypic ratio of the offspring. So we have here one homozygous black or 25%, two heterozygous spotted cow or 50%, and one homozygous white or 25%. And the phenotypic ratio is also the same with the genotypic ratio. We have one black cow or 25%, two spotted cow or 50%, and one white cow or 25%. Now the possible phenotypes are a black cow, two spotted cow, and a white cow. Number 2 is a checkered chicken. A cross between a black chicken and a white chicken, the possible offspring would be checkered. Number 3 is roan cattle. A very common type used in questions about codominance is roan fur in cattle. Cattle can be homozygous red or all red hairs, homozygous white or all white hairs, and heterozygous or red and white hairs together. So this is a good example of codominance. If a pure red bull mates with a pure white cow, all their offspring will express both the alleles of the red bull and the white cow. Cattle with roan coat are produced with the said mating of parents. Now the white coat has red patches on it. Number 4 is Appaloosa horses. Gray horses are codominant to white horses. The heterozygous horse is an Appaloosa, which means a white horse with the gray spots. When you cross a white horse with an Appaloosa horse, this will be the possible outcome. Can you see here that the trait is neither dominant nor recessive? Just like an incomplete dominance, the genotypic ratio becomes the phenotypic ratio. We have here 50% Appaloosa horse and 50% white horse for the phenotype. Number 5 is rhododendron. R allele for red flowers, W allele for white flowers, and when you cross a homozygous red flower with a homozygous white flower, so here's the possible outcome in a Punnett square. Now, codominance occurs when both alleles are expressed equally in the phenotype of the heterozygote. The red and the white flower in the figure has codominant alleles for red petals and white petals. Instead of blending to create a new picture, in codominance, both alleles are equally expressed and their features are both seen in the phenotype. Neither allele is recessive or masked in any of the generations of offspring in the case of codominance. Lastly, AB blood type. Another example of codominance is human blood type AB, in which two types of protein, A and B, appear together on the surface of blood cells. The most important blood type is the ABO system, because if you get a blood transfusion with the wrong type of blood, you could develop a severe allergic reaction and you die. The A and B blood types are codominant. If two people with homozygous type A and homozygous type B blood type alleles have children, it will look like this. Every single child, male or female, from this couple will be heterozygous. Both alleles will be expressed equally, meaning that every blood cell in their little bodies will have both A antigens and B antigens present. One allele is not dominant over the other in this case. Points to remember in codominance. First, the phenotype of the heterozygote is a combination of the phenotype of the homozygous parents. Second, the trait is neither dominant nor recessive. And third, just like in incomplete dominance, the genotypic ratio becomes the phenotypic ratio. Check your understanding. Now let us see how well versed you are when it comes to the mastery of ideas about codominance. Answer the given question based on what you have learned about the lesson. Solve the codominance problem and write your answer in your notebook. A male cattle with roan coat mates with a female which has a red coat. First, construct a Punnett square. Second, identify the possible genotype and phenotype of the offspring. And third, give its genotypic and phenotypic weight. You may pause the video to answer this. Now let us summarize the difference between the incomplete dominance and the codominance. Incomplete dominance, it occurs in the heterozygote in which the dominant allele does not dominate the recessive allele entirely. Rather, an intermediate trait appears in the offspring, while the codominance, it occurs when the alleles do not show any dominant and recessive allele relationship. However, each allele from homozygote is able to add phenotypic expressions in the offspring or simply the mix of each allele. In the incomplete dominance, the offspring phenotype is an intermediate of the parent's homozygous traits. The offspring do not show the parental phenotype, while in codominance, the phenotypic expression of the homozygous in codominance is independent. The offspring shows both parental phenotypes. Next, the expression of alleles in incomplete dominance is conspicuous, meaning none of the alleles dominates over the other. Now, the expression of alleles in codominance is uniformly conspicuous, meaning both alleles have an equal chance for expressing their effects. This time, can you guess the answer? Incomplete dominance or codominance? Well done, students! This picture shows codominance, means both equally expressed, and this picture shows incomplete dominance. Let's stop and think. Let's say there are two alleles for hair color trait, red and blue. What would be the resulting phenotype of a heterozygous pair if the alleles showed incomplete dominance? A red, B blue, C purple, D red and blue patches. Yes, you are correct. The answer is letter C, purple. Next, what would be the resulting phenotype of a heterozygous pair if the alleles showed codominance? A red, B blue, C purple, or letter D red and blue patches? Good job! The answer is letter D, red and blue patches. So that's the end of our lesson. I hope you learned something new today. Watch out for the next video lesson in science. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This has been your teacher, Rosalie Custodio, saying, learning science is fun, cool, and awesome. Till next time, students, have a nice day.